Chapter I. A morning born of Miss September 15th, 1872, did not begin with the crow of a rooster, nor with the heavy knock at the gate, nor the toll of a bell. It started with silence, so dense it seemed like the earth itself was breathing. The farmer, Elias, stepped out onto the wooden porch of his house. The boards creaked beneath his boots, yet the sound dissolved instantly in the morning air, as if the world itself was gently wrapping him in quiet. Around him lay the fog, soft, silvery, as though the night had refused to abandon these fields completely. Elias stood still and breathed in the scent of damp soil, of hay just beginning to sour, of fresh leaves carried by the wind from a nearby grove. His breathing was slow, and it seemed that his lungs drew in not just air, but life itself, spread across everything that surrounded him. The day will be long, he thought, not with worrying, but with that calm clarity that only comes with age. And that is good. Let it last. He was 52 years old, though he did not feel the weight of his years. Strength still lived in his shoulders, patience in his hands and in his eyes, that gentle light born in those who have lived long among soil, animals, and the endless cycles of time. The sky was beginning to brighten, and the first rays slowly painted the fog with golden shades. Elias watched as if it were a prayer spoken by nature itself, a prayer without words, but with a rhythm that matched the beating of a heart. He sat down on the porch step and noticed a drop of dew slid from a blade of grass and fell to the earth, leaving the smallest mark. In that moment was both an ending and a beginning, and he, the farmer with worn-out boots and scarred hands, was witness to this small but majestic drama. Chapter E. The farm as a universe. Elias' farm did not stretch far. A few dozen acres of land, a yellow timber-board house, a barn smelling of hay, and a fence he had repaired more times than he could count. Yet to him, it was more than property. Every patch of earth held memory. Here, beneath the oak, he once hid from the summer heat as a boy. There, by the pond, he caught his first fish with his father. On this field, he ploughed alone for the first time, and the earth had seemed then as endless as the sea. The farm was a book written by the hands of time. Each tree, each stone, even the paths leading from house to barn had a voice, and Elias knew how to listen. He passed the pasture where his cows chewed grass slowly, and he felt, within that chewing, there was peace, unhurried, free of ambition, untouched by worrying. The animals were wiser than men. They knew grass, water, and sunlight were enough for happiness. The wind moved through the dry stalks, and the field rustled like the sea. Elias stopped, listening. This is the voice of the earth, he told himself, at times soft as a whisper, at times fierce as a storm, but never false. The farm was not merely the place where he worked for harvest. It was a temple. Each day he stepped into labor as into worship, where instead of hymns there was the clatter of hooves, the creak of a wagon, and the swish of a scythe in the air. And he, a simple man, felt himself the priest of this temple, not because he held power, but because he knew how to bow his head before what was greater than him. Chapter 3. Bread and hands. The barn smelled of grain, warm, thick, a fragrance still echoing with summer. Elias entered slowly, as though crossing into a chamber of memories rather than a building. On the shelves lay sacks of wheat, heavy and silent. He laid his palm against the rough burlap and felt the firm life of kernels beneath. Each grain was a small sun. When he looked at them, he thought he saw all the rains, wines, and warm days gathered inside those tiny shells. And he, a man, had only helped guide them, from soil to sheaf. He sat on the bench, beside which his sickle always lay, and looked at his hands. Scars, calluses, scratches. This was his story. Hands, a book without pages. And he knew the bread made from this grain would do more than feed the body. It would carry the sunlight, the earth, and his labor. The world rests upon hands, he thought. Hands that plow, mow, mend, and comfort. No prayer is ever heard without hands to make it real. Outside, the faint ring of a cowbell sounded, and Elias smiled. One of his cows had slipped through the fence again. He rose, as if called by name. Chapter IV. The road and its traces. The path from the barn to the far edge of the field led toward the woods. This road was older than Elias himself, worn by the steps of his father, his grandfather, and by others whose names had long since dissolved into soil. He walked it slowly, as though afraid his very breath might erase it. He saw the prints of hooves, the marks of paws, each sign part of a common letter, written endlessly by nature. He paused and bent down to the earth. A damp trace of a hare's paw, light, nearly invisible, and beside it the heavy stamp of a hoof. Together, they were in a conversation that went on without him. Man thinks the road belongs to him, he thought, but truly, the road belongs to all who know how to walk. And then he felt something strange, that he himself was but a trace, a mark in the history of the land, a step in the memory of the farm, a breath within his children, who perhaps one day would also step out into a misty dawn. Chapter V. An evening that holds the light by evening. The fog had lifted, and the sky became clear, deep, like a mirror remembering every gaze. The sun sank slowly behind the hill, laying its rays on the house walls, colouring them the hue of warm copper. Elias stood by the gate. His day had passed, as had thousands before it, yet he felt that none of them were ever the same. Each day was like a breath, alike in shape, yet unrepeatable in essence. He looked at his hands, then lifted his eyes back to the field and, without speaking aloud, gave thanks to the earth, to the sky, to the animals, to himself. Gratitude was not a prayer, but life itself. And as the sun vanished beyond the horizon, he knew, within such simplicity was everything. The evening, the bread, the road, the mist, and himself, all part of a rhythm that would keep on sounding long after his footsteps were gone. Chapter VI. The voices of harvest. September deepened, and the fields breathed with a special warmth. The wheat bent under the weight of kernels, as if bowing to the soil that had raised it. Elias went into the field with his scythe. The sound it made was plain, yet within that plain sound was all rhythm, song, and memory. The blades slid through stalks, and they fell in neat rows, like pages of a great book. He felt he was not alone. Shadows of the past labored beside him. He heard his father's laughter, his grandfather's words, the footsteps of his mother carrying water on a hot day. Each generation lays down its row, he thought. We are all part of one harvest. When the sun climbed higher, he sat in the shade of the oak. The wind stirred the field, and in the rustle he heard voices, not of men, not of beasts, but of the earth itself. They did not command or instruct, they simply were. And the farmer smiled, I give thanks. Chapter V. The gift of bread. That evening he needed dough, flour, water, a pinch of salt, a drop of oil. Simple things, yet together they became a miracle. Elias knew. Bread was not merely food. It was a circle, binding beginning and end. The seeds scattered in spring now lay in his palms, ready to become sustenance. It was a sacred act. When the bread was baked, the aroma filled the house. He broke the warm loaf, and steam rose soft as breath. He ate slowly, attentively, as though listening to a story told to him by the earth itself. The bread was nourishing, but more than that, it carried within it the memory of summer, and each bite was an offering of gratitude. Chapter 8. An autumn evening. The days grew shorter, and evening came sooner. At sunset, the grove's leaves glowed with a copper fire. Elias walked to the pond, where the water already darkened with the first chill. He sat by the shore, tossed a pebble into the water, and watched the ripples spread farther and farther until they disappeared. So is life, he thought. One motion births many circles. We do not see them all, yet they move beyond us. The wind carried the scent of smoke, neighbors burning dry branches. In that smoke was something ancient, reminding him that all things pass and all return. When darkness fell, he lit his lantern and walked home. His steps were quiet, yet inside he felt the earth heard them. Chapter X. The first snowflakes winter did not come at once. First it was the breath of cold on the morning wind, then frost glittering on the grass at sunrise. But one morning, Elias opened the door and saw snow. It lay on the barn roof, on the fence, on the bare oak branches. The world seemed purer, brighter, more hushed. He stood on the threshold and listened to the silence. Snow covered not only the earth, it covered thoughts, worries, noise, and weight. All seemed softened. He stepped into the yard, lifted his hand, and caught a few snowflakes. They melted instantly, and in that vanishing was something eternal. All things come only to depart, he told himself. Yet in departing, there is beauty. Chapter X. Fire in the half-winter slowed life on the farm. The fields rested, the animals stayed longer in the warm barn, and Elias himself often sat by the hearth. The fire was his companion. He loved watching the logs turn into embers. In the flame, he saw everything: rage, tenderness, memory. He thought about how every spark was once part of a tree that had stood in the forest, now giving its light and warmth. So it is with us, he mused. Man lives only to one day become fire for others. The warmth may not always be seen, but it is there. At times, he closed his eyes and listened to the crackling wood. In that crackle was the voice of time, unhurried, steady, without haste. Chapter She. The silence of winter nights were long. The moon rose high, lighting the snow so brightly it seemed not night at all, but another day created by the heavens. Elias would step onto the porch, wrapped in a wool cloak, and stand 4 long minutes, breathing the frozen air. The night was clear, the stars above him countless, like eyes watching. He thought, we fear the dark, but in darkness lives the light. One must only lift their head. At times, he sat on the steps and listened to the snow crunch beneath some beast's paw in the woods, to the owl's hoot, to the crack of ice on the pond. It was all music of silence, and into that silence he wove his thoughts. Of the past, of how swiftly years pass, of how life is not only days of labor, but also these moments when he and the world gaze at each other without words.